further ado, I will go ahead and turn the mic over to Dr. Miller. Welcome.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to those of you who are attending. I presented this discussion just once before at MIT a few weeks ago. They provided some good feedback. If any of you have feedback afterwards, I'd appreciate that. But the context of this presentation is putting together the big inevitable changes that are going to happen in the future. And I'm not trying to be one of these speculative prognosticators. I'm basically looking at things that I consider inevitable and predictable. And so with that as a context, we're going to talk about major categories of changes, the implications for real estate, and then I'm going to apply that to what we're seeing with respect to our traditional food groups. So let's get started on some of the major inevitable trends that are affecting how we live, work, play in our society. And the first of these are longer lifespans. Longer lifespans are happening for lots of reasons, not just general medical technology, but much better diagnostic techniques, instant tumor recognition, Fitbits that you might be wearing that will include a dozen or more medical diagnoses on the fly, send them in, and all of the advances in DNA sequencing of cancer cells making treatments much more effective. When you combine all this, it basically means that by 2050, the average age of a woman who's alive now at death would be around 92, and for a man around 85. And somebody born in that year, of course, would have a much longer lifespan, and it won't be that long before we're talking about 100-year lifespans. The implications of this, of course, are let me flip back. The implications of this, of course, are strains on resources, an increasing proportion of housing design for senior citizens, and of course, there's many other implications. One of the implications, of course, of more people living longer and past their normal working lifespans is a fiscal crisis. I'm not talking about the normal recessions. We're going to have those anyway, and we're probably going to have one in about 3 years or so with the normal cycle and the trends that we see. But we're going to kick the can down the road on Social Security, entitlements, Medicare, everything we can, Medicaid. And a number of economists that I respect believe that what we're talking about is a significant fiscal crisis around 2029, 2030, where our budget just can't handle it anymore. We can't kick the can down the road anymore. And that means not just a small recession, but a pretty significant recession. Now, of course, there's implications for how you invest and what you do, and having a fiscal crisis down the road. And of course, 12, 13 years is a fair amount of time to plan, but it does mean a significant setback for our economy. We can come back to that later on. Let me keep moving on with major trends. In terms of population increases, one of the facts that not everybody's aware of is the proportion of our population that comes from net international migration. And I'm talking about legal migration here. But last year we brought in something like 2.3 million people. I'm sorry, we had an increase in population of around 2.3 million people. And nearly half of that has traditionally come from immigration. If you look at the immigration projection, this is in the fall of 2016, what you'll see, and I don't know if you can see my cursor here, is that we were expected to cross in about half a dozen years or less, where immigrants would mean more to our population increases than our natural population increases from births minus deaths. What's interesting, of course, is something that you might also be speculating on is post the election, and perhaps a surprise winner to many of us. The U.S. Census and Moody's that do these forecasts changed it dramatically. But the first thing to note on this slide is that our natural population increase is declining fairly rapidly between now and 2030. But if you look at that immigration number, take a look at the revised charts that happened near the end of 2000, near the end of January in 2017, not long ago. And what you'll notice is that we no longer have the same pattern. So if you look at this area where I placed a circle, we now have a dip. So both the census and Moody's have come up with a dip. And this is basically a decline in immigration. And again, we're talking legal immigration. And what's interesting about the dip is it lasts about 4 to 5 years. And then they have it rebounding to something close to where it was before. I don't know if this is a forecast about how long the current president will serve as a term, or how they came up with a 4 to 5 year period, but they do have a significant change in policy both now and then again in about 4 years. The reason why this is so important is because it feeds multifamily demand, it feeds jobs, and of course it does fuel our economy maybe more than some people realize. My next inevitable trend, and I've lumped a number of them together: batteries, energy production, lighter composite materials, stronger materials, flexible steel and ceramics brought together, and automation, including artificial intelligence technology. All of those are going to have dramatic impacts. I feel the most important of all of these, at least for the next dozen years, are batteries. And I have here a little battery design. If you move your lithium-ion battery from your traditional flat type of design and layers to one that's more of a pomegranate structure inside, the research has shown that we can hold 5 to 10 times as much energy in the batteries that we use now in terms of the same amount of volume, can hold 5 to 10 times as much. Plus, they're faster to recharge. Now, add to this the fact that batteries are being developed that do not degrade. I mean, right now we can go 10 years with 20% degradation, and soon we're going to have batteries with even less degradation. So the contamination, the environmental concerns about batteries will be somewhat mitigated. But think about the implications of 5 times the energy that we have right now in the typical battery. A Tesla that can right now do 250 or 310 miles range, which is the range of the Tesla 3. 310 is the Model D, 250 plus would be the Model S. If you change that to a battery that holds 5 times as much, you're talking about ranges of 1,250 miles or more. I think that's probably a game changer, and there's lots and lots of implications for that, real estate among them. And we're going to come back to this, but among the implications of better batteries are all kinds of vehicles, devices, pacemakers, cell phones that last, you name it. Here's one of the things that you get with better batteries. Some of you might have flown drones or RC planes. Nobody uses gas anymore. They're using batteries. Well, here's a drone that carries people, launched this summer in Dubai. And of course, it's autopiloted, and it can move somebody from an airport or somewhere. Not to be outdone by this version, there's another one here, which is designed by a German company, and this plane holds 2 people. They are designing one that holds 5 people. It can do 300 kilometers in range. It can fly at around 300 kilometers per hour. And so again, it's because of batteries. And this particular vehicle, I don't think I'll take the time now to show you a main flight, but if you look it up, you will see that It has a number of little motors, and it's very, very easy to fly. Next major inevitable trend, climate change, global warming, increased weather, and floods. I actually left this out of my MIT discussion because I feel some of this is down the road, and also that it just takes too much time to discuss all the implications of bad weather. But I thought I would at least touch upon a few of these. And what I have here are a couple photos from Harvey, our recent storm arrival in the U.S. that nailed Houston pretty well. And of course, they still have floods there. Now we have Irma coming, and that's probably going to nail Florida pretty good. What are the implications of global warming, increased weather, floods, aside from increased insurance rates that we saw in New York City after Sandy hit New York and New Jersey? Well, there's numerous implications. Among these, farmland in Canada and Russia is going to get more positive in terms of its productivity, and so that's actually a positive. Higher insurance cost, as I mentioned, less predictable weather. What does that mean for us? Well, I spent a fair amount of time in airports. I don't know about you, but weather delays will not be fun, especially if they're increasing. And so maybe if we have less predictable weather, I'll think more about alternative ways of getting together with people. Or maybe alternative transportation systems will become more popular. Here's one, and I'm a big fan and groupie of Elon Musk. I like to observe and listen to some of his ideas. This one is called the Hyperloop. And of course, the great thing about the Hyperloop, which most people have not discussed, aside from the fact that it costs a lot less to build than rail systems that have to buy real estate all over the place, the Hyperloop is far enough under the ground that you just have to buy the rights to go under someone's property, not actually take their surface or their property. The great thing about this is it's weather impervious. Even if you have a storm, you're not going to get delayed. So that, along with the fact that it's actually faster than current jets, or can be. Demonstrations are now in the works, and even though this might be a superior technology because of its lower cost and its imperviousness to weather, as you know, politics will determine whether or not this is given serious consideration in the United States. Outside the U.S., they are considering it. I hope we consider it here as well, because I'd rather have a surefire trip than sit in an airport for 12 hours waiting for all kinds of backups to be rearranged after a big storm. Climate change might also spur more of this, less travel. And of course, high definition video conferencing is getting better and better. And the problem with video conferencing historically has been that you didn't really see a whole body view, but you can today, and that allows people to have body language. And when someone wants to interrupt, you can see it now. And so we keep getting better and better with respect to our video conferencing, which might mean less in-person meetings if there's an issue that is less predictable in the future. Also, with respect to technology, one of the big trends, and I'm sure everybody knows about it, 3D printing. But it's generally been applied so far to things like the jewelry industry, little models and designs, the toy industry, parts replacement industries are starting to use it. We haven't really used it for real estate much, although you can print some composites, ceramic, concrete materials and make buildings. But in the future, we are probably going to use it much more, using materials and designs that mimic biology. Biomimicry will be much more common. And we can also use it to make building parts more efficiently with less waste. So the implications of having building technologies with less waste are numerous. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. But the implications, less waste, thinner floors, more floors, higher ceilings, lighter, greater diversity of interesting designs, all customized. And let me give you a few examples. Again, we're using biomimicry. We're taking designs from nature for inspiration because they tend to be very strong and lightweight. Here's a 3D printed structure that Gensler put together, just using some kind of composite concrete. Here's one that has some biomimicry in it. More customized, more difficult, challenging designs. If you've ever seen a Frank Gehry building, you know they're hard to build. In the future, as we use new technologies for construction, we should find it easier to build such buildings. And some, of course, are beautiful as well. My next inevitable trend, autonomous cars. And of course, I've seen lots of articles about this. I've written one for Institutional Real Estate Investor with implications. What are the implications of this? This happens to be a BMW, I think, design. But of course, one of the leaders would be Tesla. Lots of implications, but here's an interesting graph for you. Tesla is now worth more than Ford. And that's kind of astounding considering the fact that Tesla has never made any money. And Ford is actually profitable. But it does tell you something about what the market thinks about the future. And of course, Tesla is one of the ones leading the way on autonomous cars, but not the only one. So let's do a little poll here if you want. Which scenario do you think is more realistic? One scenario would say slow increments towards autonomous driving without us even realizing it. That is, right now, the Tesla autonomous vehicles, they're not really autonomous in that it's not legal yet, but they do have staying in your lane, staying between the car in front and back features that are already being implemented, and many of the Tesla owners are already using that feature. One of the places that might be considered low-hanging fruit would be semi-truck use on the highways. Highway drivers can only go 8 hours legally right now, but if they're allowed to stay in the truck 24 hours and sleep when it's on the highway while it's in the stay-in-your-lane mode, and they can go 24 hours, it dramatically lowers the cost of trucking, which is heavily geared towards the labor cost. And of course, this low increment means that regulation is going to take a while, but eventually I'll be able to work, play, sleep in the car. The time lapse here might be a whole generation of 28 years. The other scenario would be the full Monty, total autonomous driving within 10 years, an Uber car picking you up with no driver. Which do you think is more likely? I'm not sure exactly how we do this poll thing, but if the first scenario is more likely, why don't you put the first? And if the second scenario is more likely, why don't you put the second? And I'll tell you what people say here. If you have a view on this, if you send in a first or second scenario. I can tell you that my students think the second scenario is more likely. I can tell you that the audience at MIT, which was mostly people from, say, 45 to 75, thought the slow increment scenario was more likely. And I'm getting a few responses here, and I'm guessing that the second scenario is a little bit more likely from this group. All right, moving on. Next inevitable trend, urban factory farming and synthetic food production. There was a book, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, about the population bomb and how we couldn't produce enough food, but it's incredible how much more efficient farms have gotten. And it is a leap forward of 5 to 10 times the productivity that you can do on land when you do it in urban factories and you do it synthetically. We've made tremendous strides here doing urban farming. Not only do you avoid the need for pesticides, but you have less waste and a fraction of the water that you need in traditional farms. When you combine it with fish farms, typically tilapia, and you take their waste as a fertilizer and an input, and you set up shelves and you use efficient lighting, which is just the pink light spectrums that make plants grow without all the energy for everything else. It's extremely efficient, extremely low on water utilization, and again, no pesticides. This would explode the amount of food that we could produce, and of course allow us to let population increases continue without running out of resources, at least in those industrialized areas that can implement such capital-intensive farming strategies. Seventh, machines for everything that you can imagine. You know, robotics are entering our life. They're doing it slowly. I have a robotic vacuum cleaner. My friends are buying these little computers that you talk to. That's really a type of robotic control, asking them questions, interacting. They're entering our lives in all kinds of ways. We're seeing surgery being done robotically more accurately than humans can do it. That still scares me. I had surgery about 3 weeks ago, and it was a human, and I'm kind of glad, but someday maybe this is the way we'll go. And of course, robotics can be done at nano size and attack problems that right now are hard to cure, again, extending our lifespans. Even pollination can be done robotically by little nano machines, because we have unfortunately knocked off too many of our honeybees with pesticides and other problems. And of course, robotics are in some cases looking more like us. This is a robot that can interact by voice. It's not American made, this one's Japanese made, and looks like a Caucasian, of course. And even up close, it looks pretty darn real, and she has facial expressions, and that's kind of spooky. Robotics for security, robotics for cleaning, robotics for taking care of seniors, and all types of other uses are now entering our lives. And of course, one of the implications is that so many of the jobs are done by robotics, and we don't need as many people to keep the productivity going for our economy. People will be able to work shorter weeks, and what will we do eventually if we have you know, an unemployable class that don't have the skills? We'll be supporting a greater proportion of our society. So which jobs are most susceptible to automation, robots, and machine learning? Well, senior care, yes. Child care, yes. Bank security, dishwasher, court clerk, toll collector, telemarketer, data researcher. And of course, you're talking to computers already on the phone, even though you probably hate it. Teachers, Billy Parkers, surgeons, and others. And the answer is all of these are susceptible to machine learning, automation, and robotic replacement, even professors. Who's safest? Well, not many of us, but jobs requiring manipulation and persuasion or negotiation, they're still done best by people. Jobs requiring creativity and innovation, jobs requiring extreme hand dexterity and instant reactions to complex phenomena are still done best by people. Now, it might be that we're not always in a job that fits these descriptions, and there are probably others. Next major trend, educating for critical thinking versus information. So many of you are already Googling, as you call it, when you need to check on a fact. And of course, we don't need to memorize as much as we did in the past. Probably 70% of our education in first through primary school in the United States has been memorization. And we'll still memorize, and I think we'll still need to memorize, but not as much as we did in the past. We'll spend more of that time on analytics, and schools will need to adapt. These analytical skills and data analytics in particular are going to be an exploding field. And again, schools are going to need to adapt, or we're just not going to use them. We're going to go to private alternative choices. Virtual reality, It's becoming indistinguishable from real reality. You can, of course, try on clothes. You can pick the partner you want to exercise with for yoga or sword fighting. It can be an immersive experience that is hard to distinguish from reality. And of course, one of the questions is, what will happen to our social skills when we can select our virtual partners? You know, if we don't like a virtual partner, we'll just replace them. And you wonder if that's going to affect us in other ways. And will simulated travel substitute for real travel for those with more modest means? You know, maybe you want to go to Taj Mahal, you don't like the heat, you don't want your shoes taken. You'll take a virtual tour that might be just as good as the real thing if you don't have enough money to actually travel there. So let's switch over to part 2, real estate implications of all of these trends. First of all, here's our traditional food group: single family, office, retail, multifamily, lodging, industrial. Each of these is being affected. Of course, the sharing economy, we're more utilizing homes than we used to: home away, home to go, Airbnb, of course, VRBO, are all ways to utilize homes. And that is a result of these trends. And higher utilization means higher value. Also, you don't need quite as much if you share as you did before. In the alternative living arrangement world, WeWork, which you all are aware of in the office market, has launched a multifamily concept called We Live. It's kind of a high-end communal-like apartment. It's like the Soviet system done right, where you have a bedroom and a bathroom. The Soviets would share bathrooms. Now, WeWork has a We Live concept. They don't share bathrooms, and they have a basic kitchen. But they do share the gourmet kitchens, the game rooms, the rooftop decks, the high-end amenities, and maybe this is a concept that makes sense and will catch on. We're seeing it in a few big cities. We're seeing it in Hong Kong, done by others. And of course, it's a whole other lifestyle, and you could rent these, but conceivably you could buy into these like condominiums as well, or timeshares as another alternative. These units for We Live come completely furnished, and maybe they can set up memberships so that I can have units wherever I want to and travel and have more mobility, and of course that would be appealing, not to be tied down to one city. If you want to explore this, take a look at WeLive.com. The implications. Well, there's many implications, of course. Greater utilization of assets creates greater values, but it also means that we don't need as much total stock. In the single-family market, we're seeing more developments on water and more concepts on water, ocean, lakes. Maybe if we have more flooding, this will become a necessity. And we're seeing more automation in the construction of homes. This has been done in the 1980s in Japan in factories, but my favorite and the most advanced technologies I've seen applied to homes are by Weberhaus out of Germany. If you type this in and check them out, you will definitely be impressed if you haven't seen them. Their homes are better insulated, more energy efficient. They're built rather quickly in the factory in units and components. The walls are thicker. There's so much less waste that they can build the homes more efficiently. And I'll show you a couple examples. Again, they build these in the factory, but they pour some concrete, they damp-proof it. The crane brings in the units. They lower completed wall units with windows and conduits, and they can set these up in a matter of days. Here's a wall unit being set in, and note it's much thicker than you typically see in the United States. These are several inches thick, and of course they're better insulated and good for cold climates because of that. In day 3, they're putting in roofs, and they have a weather-tight home in just 3 days, and in about a week they have a home. This is one of many, many models. There's another one. And of course, because you build them in the factory, there's less waste. They're more precise. They're more airtight, more energy efficient. They're building them in with solar. And they've been doing this for a couple of decades now. And in the United States, one of the criticisms is that we just do not use technology even when it's available. And we've been slow to integrate new technologies, more so in the home building industry and the construction industry than in any other industry. To solve the problem of affordability, of course, we need density. Politically, as you know, that is hard, but that's really the only solution, is to have more density. And of course, the homeownership rate around the world has been falling. And now if you have these we live concepts and you have mobility and you can buy something that you can use in multiple cities, that might be more appealing. But after the 2008-2010 housing crisis, some people just don't find housing as an investment as appealing as they did before. And then you tack on student loan debt, which is tremendous and affecting the affordability or ability of the next generation to buy homes. That is significantly hampering home ownership, and it will. My forecast with my colleagues is that home ownership rates in the United States will not turn around that quickly, and in fact will possibly dip close to 60 or below 60% by 2030, which means that they'll be shifting more to multifamily. And as you add more multifamily amenities and more workspaces, then you have a better environment within which to live and work, and more appealing. Office is also evolving. You know, we've gone from the cubicles to different, more adaptive configurations, flexible conference rooms, different kinds of workspaces. They're not for everybody, and some people still want their private offices. And Gensler says that you need about 1 square foot private to 7 square feet open in order to accommodate that private, non-distracted work time that you need. But we're probably going to see more and more of this collaborative space when you get together, as well as the ability to work any place you want to. And firms out there are trying to make it attractive for you to come in. They're competing with, you know, working at home or Starbucks or wherever you enjoy working, and providing more amenities and more alcohol. And of course, we're working anywhere, like we have for a while, and that will continue. We're also seeing some of the excess retail space go to office space or housing in some cases. Some of the big boxes have moved over to convert to housing and mixed use, but it's interesting that Verizon is taking some of their extra space and making it co-working space, and they're trying to market other products and opportunities for selling other things, which is an interesting trend to watch, and it'll be interesting to see if Verizon finds this a successful business strategy. The autonomous cars we mentioned before are forcing us to redesign garages. And here's an example of a garage built in Seattle. And what you don't see in this garage floor are ramps. Instead, what you see are elevators. And they have 2 elevators that bring cars up and down. The floors on the parking garage are flat. And the reason they do this is, of course, to make conversion easy. In the future, I suspect we're going to see more and more of this, a couple elevators, flat floors, because we just don't know how much parking we're going to need on site versus off site. Now, if we can eliminate some of the parking for multifamily housing, it would become much more affordable. It's a significant cost if we can put some more of the parking off site or have better transportation systems. So this will be a big benefit, and we're going to need to see more flexible designs in the future, in case this garage space no longer needs to be used for parking. Another implication is that we're going to need a lot more access ramps when people are being dropped off for parking. You know, take your typical convention building, and they have a lot of parking nearby. You're going to need a lot more access ramps to drop people off. In that same vein, if you have an autonomous car, and you are a professional and you're paid pretty well, you may not want your car to park at all. You may have a meeting that maybe will run 30, 40 minutes. You'll tell your car to go to the outskirts of the city for 15, 20 minutes and then come back and just hover and travel around the city in a loop and stay near you because you want it there when you come down from the meeting because your time's valuable. Imagine if we have a lot of people putting their cars in hover modes instead of needing less space on the road, even though autonomous cars can drive closer together than people can. We're going to clog up the urban areas with hovering cars. So we're probably going to have to invoke tolls and fines and fees for cars that hover too long, or charge people for this. But the assumption that we'll need less roads is not necessarily true with autonomous cars. Switching over to retail. Retail, of course, is going to continue to be more observational, interactive, because Amazon is so customized to my preferences. I'll want the stores to be customized to my preferences too. If I'm walking down the aisle, I'll want it to tell me about specials for foods that I like. It's going to have to know who I am walking down the aisle, be interactive, and provide an experience that's worth going to. I happen to think that 2017 might be the watershed year, the tipping point for retail. In 2010, you might remember, we had a lot of retail places that closed up, but we had a lot of new ones that opened up. This year, we're not seeing it. More of them are closing down than are opening, and we're just not seeing the new innovative retail stores open up. So your traditional middle-of-the-road retailers, not the high end or the low end, but the JCPenney's, the Sears, the Macy's, they look like they are slowly headed for obsolescence. It looks like we still have a healthy market in terms of retail shopping centers at the high end, the very high end luxury customized goods, and the very low end, think of your Dollar General kind of place, where some of the people don't use the internet for shopping. But the middle looks like it is definitely going through a big transition. And of course, Amazon bought Whole Foods, or merging with Whole Foods, and look what happened to the stocks. Everybody else went down, they went up, or Whole Foods went up. That's forecast by the market as to how successful they think this is going to be. And here's another chart on closings this year. And if you just glance through those, none of them should be a surprise. H.H. Gregg, Radio Shack, so forth, closing up. This is a foretelling chart as well. In 2015, Amazon became more valuable than Walmart. And of course, Amazon has one version of future retail, no checkout lines. And we're seeing this tested in different ways. Amazon's using your phones to identify you, and they're using cameras and computer algorithms to know what you put into your cart and charge you for it. But other vendors are using facial recognition and biometrics instead, and they're also going with no checkout lines. So it's very possible that our children, our grandchildren, are not going to know what we mean by checkout lines. Those will be a thing of a past. You go into a store, take what you want, you're charged automatically. And of course, there's an Apple retail outlet, but what it really is, it's a warehouse surrounding these walls with some retail display space. So I would argue this is really a warehouse with a central retail location. And of course, they also have no checkout lines. Some of you that might have been to South Korea might have seen these, but these are not actually goods on a shelf. These are nothing but images. They're life-size images. And the people that you see here shopping are using their phones and reading barcodes and saying, I want a certain quantity of this item, and they're going to be delivered to their apartment or home a couple hours later. If we start ordering more and more things on an instant basis, perhaps our dinners, our food, or other things, we're going to need storage lockers in buildings where we live. And one version of this is where you order something, say Amazon Whole Foods, and they deliver your your dinner, you'll get a text message. It'll give you a code. You'll type it into a keypad that will open a locker, and you'll pull it out. Now, of course, if you're in New York City, maybe you're going to have meat versus milk lockers. If you're in California, you might have your GMO versus non-GMO, or your gluten-free lockers, or peanut-free lockers, or whatever it is. But this is probably something that building owners should be designing into any kind of multifamily building or condominium as soon as possible. Hotels, a place where we don't just sleep, but we work. Here's some of the newer concepts. Citizen M is one of my favorites. It's a great place to work. It's got great work collaborative spaces. It's got computers for you to work. You check in on your own. You check out by yourself. There's fewer people. It's more automated. It's very reasonably priced, and it's very comfortable. Here's another one, Hyatt-centric, geared towards the people that use a hotel for work and meetings. There's many others. Here's one called graduate hotels. I don't really get this. Social engineering or hotel, you have to have a graduate degree to stay there. You know, are we going to have the MIT alumni hotel, the Crocodile Guys hotel? You know, is this legal? I don't know. But we're seeing hotels morph into new kind of properties. We're also going to have hotel cars, sleeper cars. I mean, instead of staying in a hotel in San Francisco, maybe I'll get in a sleeper car in San Diego. I'll wake up the next day, maybe after watching a movie, you know, refreshed just in time to go on a flight. Maybe this will be one of the options. I can video conference in it. I can sleep in it. And will this substitute for hotels to some extent? I don't know. Airports owning hotels, that kind of bothers me. I'm going to be suspicious of the next delay I get. So, bringing this back to conclusions, what are the real estate implications for all of these trends? What do not we need as much of as we had before? We don't need as many libraries, except as gathering places. Gas stations. We don't need as many banks. We don't need as much retail. We don't need as much office. We don't need as many home garages. We don't need as much traditional schools, landfills, traditional farms, or bus stations. We won't need as much in-building parking. What will we need more of? 3D printing manufacturing centers, biotech, nanotech, DNA sequencing analysis buildings, more remote parking stations, more multi-transit nodes, more urban farms, more recharging stations, more data centers, more senior housing of all types, more virtual reality conference centers, gaming centers, exercise centers. All those we'll see more of. And are there others? Perhaps so. So we go back to our traditional real estate types. And what we are seeing is that these traditional types of real estate are blurring. We have social clubs now that are merging office and lodging, working like Citizen M. We have online backroom inventory, retail warehousing space. We have single-family, multifamily concepts merging together, or multifamily ownership where you have mobility. We have live workspaces. We have short-term rentals that compete with hotels. We have excess retail morphing into office and service centers and even housing. And of course, we have data centers that we're going to need a lot more of. Biotech, nanotech manufacturing centers that will have to be new clean room facilities. Self-storage, we still have, we're going to continue to need that, climate control, and new types of designs, new types of buildings. And so I see all of this as blurred lines, as a morphing of our traditional forms of real estate. So my conclusions: science and innovation can save us from ourselves and our resource limitations and those fiscal crises that we're going to have by 2029, 2030. I am an optimist on humans' ability to be innovative and for science and technology to improve things. I am a pessimist when it comes to politics and political solutions. I expect we'll have a fiscal crisis by 2030 that'll lead to some dramatically painful decisions. Home ownership and car ownership will be less important. Housing will be denser, more affordable. Of course, in California, they're going to politically fight that like crazy. Real estate offices, residential hotels, warehousing are all morphing into new types of overlapping uses. And some traditional uses of real estate are going to vanish. Retail is becoming available everywhere. I expect the luxury brands catering to those with lots of discretionary time and money will continue to sell by in-person visits, and also the low end by people that don't really like to shop online. Delivery service transport is going to be automated, just like our cars. And so with that, I will be happy to take a look at our questions. If you have any, please send any questions in, comments. And comments to my email there are appreciated. Sarah, I think there's a question or so. I'm having a little trouble seeing it on my computer screen here. But if you can help me out with
yeah, actually, seeing is a comment, and I think this came in when you were talking about ways that obviously the disruptions are going to change commercial real estate. But the comment was that rooftops can be used for drone taxis.
Oh, that's true. So that would be if we have some flat rooftop space, we don't need to compete with parking space and surface parking lots. That's a really good point. That larger German design, that is about 30 feet, 33 feet wingspan. And so that's kind of your dimensions, and that would fit in a lot of places, a lot of office properties. Other questions, comments, chat that you want to provide? I appreciate.
We have a question here, Dr. Miller. It says, how can self-storage be an increasing demand if millennials and future generations are less acquisitive of material goods?
Well, I don't know when that transition is going to happen. All I know is that per capita, we've continued to store things. And I keep thinking about that George Carlin routine where we need a place to put our stuff. But every time I've bought a bigger house, somehow my wife and I, especially my wife, she's not listening, seems to fill it up with stuff. You know, and we're not willing to give that up yet. But I do agree, it does make sense that because of the affordability problems, you know, if we become less materialistic, we'll have less stuff. But right now, if the trend is towards smaller units, smaller housing, we still need storage spaces for the things that we use less frequently. And I guess that's the trend that I'm recognizing here. But I do agree that someday it's likely to reverse. I'm hoping to reverse it in my own family as well. Appreciate the comment. Any other, Sarah, or?
One more just came in. It says, any thoughts about whether people will crave being unplugged from technology? Will tech-free become the new smoke-free?
That's a great question. So there's two books I highly recommend, and maybe this is where we'll end our webinar. One book that you should all read is called The Undoing Project. If you haven't read it already, it questions everything about how we apply traditional science, psychology, economics, and so forth. The other one I highly recommend, and it's available on audiobooks. It's about a 7-hour listen. I've been listening to it on my long flights. It's called Deep Work. And what it emphasizes is that so many of us have become addicted to social media. I think that the average teenager spends about an hour and a half on social media per day. What I tell my students is, please don't use Instagram, don't tweet, don't use Facebook except on weekends, and take a certain amount of your day and plan to unplug. And this book, Deep Work, it's written by a guy named Cal Newport. He suggests that, you know, you really need an hour or sometimes 3 and 4 hours of concentrated focus time to really get good work done. And you need that at least 2 or 3 times a week. So I put it in your schedule, and I would definitely agree that totally disconnecting is exactly what productive, innovative people are going to be doing in the future. And if you have any friends that are spending an hour and a half every day on social media, they're not as productive, and it's going to stay that way. It's an addiction that is starting to plague our society. But this author, Cal Newport, highly recommends total disconnection. And you can do it a lot of ways. I sometimes will go to the library or Starbucks, and you go into a place like that where nobody knows you, and you're not bothered like you might be in the office. And we definitely need areas to disconnect. So, point well taken. And yes, that's going to be the new luxury for some of us. So I thank you all for your time. I hope that I stimulated some thinking. If you have comments, again, nmiller@sandiego.edu. And I thank you all and wish you a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Dr. Miller, and we appreciate all of you for attending this webinar. I will be posting the recording as well as the slides if any of you are interested. So I'll shoot an email out to all attendees, giving them the location of that as well. Thanks so much and have a great day.